Deputy Secretary, we are ready to begin.
Thank you, Chairman Phillips. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. This is the time and place that has been noticed for the open meeting of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to consider the matters that have been duly posted by the Commission. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Commissioners, since the March open meeting, the Commission has issued 83 notational orders. Thank you, Chairman Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Secretary. In the interest of time, if we could just please move directly to the discussion agenda, and we will defer opening statements until after presentations.
We'll do that. This morning, the presentation discussion item for this afternoon, is A3, concerning the evaluation of the physical security reliability standard and physical attacks on the bulk power system. There will be a presentation by Jim Robb, CEO and President of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation.
I was going to say good morning, but I think I'll say good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. On behalf of NERC, I really appreciate the opportunity to review the response to the Commission's order directing us to conduct a study on the CIP 14 physical security standard. Filed with the Commission last Friday, our study outlines actions to strengthen the standard and foster robust stakeholder engagement to consider additional risk-based enhancements. I'd like to start by stressing that we fully share the Commission's deep concern for the recent increase in physical attacks on electricity infrastructure. There were almost 1,700 physical security incidents reported to the EISAC in 2022. That was a 10% increase over 2021. Typical security incidents against the grid involve vandalism, tampering, arson, and ballistic damage. And most of these do not result in grid impacts, but a trend toward more serious events definitely occurred in 2022. To cite several recent examples, in November of last year, there were a series of attacks at 6 different substations in Oregon and Washington state, 5 of which resulted in power disruptions. Shortly thereafter, on December 3rd, a ballistic attack against 2 substations in Moore County, North Carolina, targeted the substation's transformer radiators and their circuit breakers. That resulted in those substations being removed from service, and that forced 5 additional undamaged substations to be powered down, and the consequence were outages for nearly 42,000 customers during a December cold spell. Last December, damage to 2 substations in Seattle-Tacoma resulted in outages during the Christmas holiday. These recent high-profile events are deeply concerning for their sophistication and effectiveness, even while noting that the customer impacts were localized. And in February of this year, law enforcement agents effectively thwarted a plot by domestic extremists to attack 5 substations in the Baltimore area with an eye towards disrupting service to the majority of the city. These are sobering times indeed for the electric grid. We have a front row seat to these kinds of security events through our operation of the Electricity ISAC and our physical security team, the role that Manny Cancel and I play on the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. The ESCC convened shortly after the Moore County events to share insights and to coordinate industry response. In January, we convened the ESCC leadership and decided to have the EISAC and industry trade associations collaborate to develop and share an updated physical security resource guide that detailed broader considerations in developing a physical security approach for all assets beyond those that are deemed critical by CIP 14. Recognizing the increase in physical attacks and a need to evaluate the adequacy of the physical security standard in the evolving risk environment, you all ordered us to conduct a study evaluating CIP 14. And in my conversations with Commission leadership, I thought this was totally appropriate. I appreciate the Commission creating the focus for us to conduct such an assessment. In its order, you directed us to answer 3 questions. First, is the applicability criteria for CIP 14 adequate? Second, is the risk assessment adequate, taking into account information that we've gathered through our compliance audits of the standard? And third, should we consider a minimum level of physical protection be established for all BES transmission stations and substations and primary control centers? These are great questions, and I'll address our findings on each in turn. Concerning the first question, we found that the applicability criteria meet the objectives of CIP 14, and at this point, we do not recommend expansion of the CIP 14 applicability criteria. CIP 14 was conceived to identify those critical assets that, if rendered inoperable, could result in what we call the evil three: instability, uncontrolled separation, or cascading system conditions. The criteria established by CIP 14 make the requirements applicable to the overwhelming majority of 345 kV and all 500 kV substations. The analytics we have conducted and the data we have gathered do not suggest that additional assets beyond those already identified could result in those evil three outcomes. And that's what CIP 14 was designed to protect against. This finding is buttressed by the work of one major multi-state utility system who shared with us that they conducted risk assessments of all of their substations and they came to the same conclusion. That said, I think we do believe that it's possible that additional data and analysis could lead to different conclusions and that more substation configurations could warrant assessment under CIP 14. So we recommend that NERC work with Commission staff to hold a technical conference aimed at identifying if additional substations should be included and studied, and to establish what data needs would need to be put in place to determine if the applicability criteria should be modified. But at this point, we don't believe there's a case to do so. Regarding the second question, our findings demonstrate that the objective of CIP 14 risk assessment requirements remain appropriate. However, we do believe that additional specificity is needed to address concerning the expectations for the risk assessments that utilities conduct, to identify which of the subset of applicable substations should actually be deemed critical and therefore reinforced under the standard. Data from the Compliance Monitoring and Enforcement Program found inconsistent approaches to performing the risk assessment, particularly as it relates to dynamic studies. In some instances, entities did not provide the technical studies expected, nor adequate justification for their study decisions, which resulted in non-compliances. We believe that inconsistent approaches to the risk assessment stem from a lack of specificity in the requirement language concerning the nature and parameters of the risk assessment. So to address this, we're going to initiate a standards development project to provide additional clarity on the risk assessment requirements, and we're starting to draft a standard authorization request to that end. On the third question, we are not recommending a common minimum level of physical security protections at this time. That does not mean that we're insensitive to the vulnerabilities that inherent in the sprawling above-ground infrastructure that reflect the design of the electric grid, nor to the fact that many substations are located outside of population centers where there is not substantial foot traffic or visibility. However, we do strongly recommend and believe in taking a risk-based approach to this problem. Physical security hardening of substations can be extraordinarily expensive. For example, something as simple as a camera installation could easily run into hundreds of thousands of dollars per substation. So it's important that the risk abated is commensurate with the capital required. Utilities have reported to us spending $10 to $15 million or more to reinforce individual substations. Those substations located outside of the CIP 14 criteria may create localized impacts if rendered inoperable, but not the broad BPS events that CIP 14 was designed to prevent. Further, local, regional, and resilience criteria and conditions will differ substantially across the continent, making a uniform standard very difficult to establish. And then finally, utilities will differ in their ability to isolate a damaged substation and restore a service quickly through the use of spares or even mobile substation equipment. We further note that as many NERC standards, CIP 14 establishes a baseline requirement. Utilities can, in consultation with their cost recovery authorities, invest in additional protections designed to mitigate local impacts of physical attacks if deemed warranted. All that said, given the increase in physical security attacks on the BPS, we do believe that there's a need to continue to evaluate this question and to determine which reliability, resilience, and security measures should be designed and implemented to mitigate the risks associated with physical attacks. As with our response to the first question, my team will work with Commission staff to hold a technical conference to study further appropriate levels of physical protection and other measures that could mitigate the impact of a physical attack. That assessment should be risk-based and determine what level of investment would be appropriate based on local risk factors, regional system configuration, and the asset's mean time to recover. The technical conference will gather additional data on protection, response, and resilience measures and discuss whether they should be incorporated into reliability standards or guidelines, and if so, what the best mechanism for doing so would be. We're very confident that the actions outlined in our report will help further secure BPS assets and ensure that the foundational protections of CIP 14 are keeping pace with the dynamic risk environment. You have my commitment that we will act on these recommendations with due urgency and continue to reinforce that there are many ongoing activities that industry stakeholders should continue to pursue. To summarize a few of those, first, it's clear that law enforcement and information sharing between the private and public sector is key, and utilities should continue to be proactive in building ties with local FBI field offices and local state law enforcement. The Baltimore area plot stresses the need for strong relationships with law enforcement at all levels, the intelligence community, as well as the EISAC. Second, as noted earlier, the industry should leverage the ESCC resource guide to continue to implement best practices in risk assessment and ultimate mitigations. Third, to enhance recovery options, more standardization of substation and critical equipment should be performed. And then finally, where feasible, looking for ways to reconfigure transmission systems to build a system that is inherently more resilient and less dependent on a handful of critical assets will help engineer the system for security and reduce the risk of a major physical security event on the system. So again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon and share our report and findings with you today. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Robb, for the presentation. I also applaud NERC for meeting the aggressive timeline that we put forth for you to submit the report. I think it is a good start. We have talked about this issue of physical security many times. There is no greater priority for me and for this commission than making sure that we protect the security of our electric grid. With that, I'll turn to my colleagues to see if they have any comments. Commissioner Danley?
No comment other than to say thank you, and this is an ongoing process. We've been dealing with it for years, so I appreciate this next step. Thank you.
Commissioner Clements?
Thank you, Mr. Robb, to you and your team for the report, and particularly interested in that last point on reconfiguring how we build the system and how we think about that on a going forward basis at a time where we will be investing a great deal in the system. But in general, I appreciate your commitment to keep vigilant on this and to continue to work with the Commission. So thanks.
Commissioner Christie?
Thank you to NERC. Once again, excellent job. Thank you for your leadership, Jim, and really appreciate your all's efforts. Thanks, Commissioner.
Also, just want to personally thank you for your flexibility today on the start time. We will work with you and your team on making sure we have that technical conference
Very
as well. Thank you so much.
Terrific, thank you.
All right. Now, Madam Deputy Secretary, I think we will turn to opening remarks. All right. Today's open meeting is during Earth Week, which culminates in Earth Day on Saturday. As I've said, one of my top priorities is sustainability, and it remains top of mind for me along with reliability and affordability. On March 29th, we held FERC's first ever Environmental Justice Roundtable, and we heard from many residents of EJ communities, advocates, industry members, and other experts on how FERC and what FERC can do better regarding EJ issues. And today, with the orders that we will be issuing, I can say that in 4 months, this FERC, with a 2-2 membership, has done more to lift the voices of EJ communities than any other FERC in the history of this commission. Before I get to some of the items on the agenda, I want to talk about 2 notices that we issued since we last met. Last week, the commission issued a supplemental notice of the second New England Winter Gas Electric Forum, scheduled for June 20th in Portland, Maine. And yesterday, the commission issued a formal notice announcing our forum on the PJM capacity market. The forum will take place on June 15th at FERC headquarters from noon to 5 p.m. Turning to the agenda, I want to talk a little bit about item E1. E1 focuses on cybersecurity and is a draft final rule that establishes a framework for incentive-based rate treatments for cybersecurity investments by public and non-public utilities. Congress directed the Commission to revise its regulations to establish incentive-based rate treatments to encourage utilities to invest in advanced cybersecurity technology. While the Commission has until May 13, 2023 to issue the final rule, we believe that promoting cybersecurity is critical and are pleased that we have been able to act almost a month in advance of that deadline. Thank you to the staff for all the hard work that they've done to achieve this. Cybersecurity expenditures will only be incentive eligible if they both materially improve cybersecurity and are not already mandated by law or by standard. At its core, this final rule will allow 3 ways to apply for incentive-based rate treatment for cybersecurity investments. First, any investment that is included on the pre-qualified or PQ list. Second, a case-by-case basis for its cybersecurity investments. And third, early compliance with new mandatory SIP reliability standards. Again, I want to thank and give major kudos to everybody that was involved with this. Especially I want to call out on my staff, Cal Ayub, who was working from 30,000 feet on a trip back from a cybersecurity conference in London. And I don't think he slept a bit yesterday. So thank you so much for all of your hard work there. Finally, and I'll shut up, I want to talk about 2 LNG orders on the agenda today, Rio Bravo and Texas LNG. This is in response to the DC Circuit's remand in 2021. I will concur in today's orders because we have provided a full response to the deficiencies identified by the court. First, with respect to climate change, the court held that the Commission did not adequately respond to arguments arguing why it should deploy social cost of carbon, and we have included those social cost of carbon figures in this order. Second, with respect to environmental justice, the court held that the Commission did not adequately explain its method for identifying environmental justice communities potentially affected by the projects. In response, we have conducted a full review of the project's impacts on environmental justice communities. While I recognize that some of my colleagues may have wanted more process or less, I believe that the order that we issue today strikes an appropriate middle ground. It represents an adequate basis to fully consider the issues the court remanded to us in Vecinos nearly 2 years ago. Importantly, today's order takes an unprecedented and bipartisan step to protect environmental justice communities from potential concerns about the project's effect on air quality. The Commission is, for the first time, on its own accord, requiring that the project sponsors ensure that the overlapping construction and operation of a project do not cause any significant air quality impacts on environmental justice communities. And with that, I'll turn to my colleagues for their remarks. Commissioner Danley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm only going to talk about E1, which is the cybersecurity rule. And I think it's worth taking one moment before I criticize it to put it in context. From the day that the chairman showed up, he has been enthusiastic and unflagging in his support for ensuring that the NERC reliability standards are up to scratch. And so I say all of that with that in the background. I'm dissenting on E1 because I think that the majority order that issues today is simply insufficient based upon the unambiguous declarations of Congress and the clear purpose that it had in directing us to incentivize certain types of investments. We can quibble all we like about whether or not that was the right way to do it. It doesn't matter. We've been given our marching orders by Congress, and it has been a matter of continuous interest to any number of policymakers that we take more aggressive stances on cybersecurity. This rule fails to encompass a sufficient quantity of the entire electric system, and it demands certain levels of materiality that I think are simply not appropriate given the statutory language. So I'm dissenting on it. You can read my dissent. It's fairly unstinting in its criticism of the majority order, but fundamentally we are not doing what Congress envisioned in this order, and I regret the fact that the opportunity is being missed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Cummings.
Thank you. Hello, good afternoon. I want to briefly mention a few people on my team today. Tanya Kiatani is an intern that we've had all year. She stayed the whole academic year, which is tough for a law student, and I want to thank her for her participation and additions to our team. You'll also see that Byron Corum is back from parental leave, and we are really thrilled to have him back. Sad we're going to lose Lauren Campbell in that process, back to staff who I'm sure will welcome her in OPI, but she's been really jumping in and doing a great job for us, and particularly on E1, which has been, as you mentioned, a time commitment this month, so I want to thank her as well. And I also want to thank Cal and the team on E1 and for getting that across the finish line. So I'll start with some good news on the agenda. So don't go away from this meeting thinking I'm all tough and grumble. But I want to mention the orders E6 to E11 that might go fly under the radar. They're compliance orders for Order 881, which was the Commission's final rule to require that transmission providers use ambient adjusted ratings on their systems. This is an important decision, and it's the beginning of a bigger opportunity to squeeze more juice out of our existing system at minimal cost to customers, certainly relatively minimal cost to customers. The Commission has dockets open on an inquiry about dynamic line ratings in our interconnection NOPR, in our transmission NOPR, and these moving forward with opportunities to promote various kinds of grid enhancing technologies are really no-brainers when it comes to the Commission's responsibility to ensure fair rates. So I look forward to continuing to work on those. And now I'll move on to the gas items. Items C1 and C2, the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, and Texas LNG orders, I'll be dissenting from both of them today. The DC Circuit remanded the Facino orders in August 2021. They remanded them. The basis for that remand, as the chairman mentioned, was the deficient analysis on greenhouse gas impacts and impacts on environmental justice communities. Responsibility for the timing or nature of the Commission's response to that remand hasn't been the responsibility of the commissioners sitting here today. But today the question is, how do we deal with this deck of cards we've been dealt? What I see happening here is an insufficient order that creates a lose-lose situation. It's going to invite further litigation and further delay for the project sponsors who want to get this done. And it is a loss for the potentially impacted communities who haven't had the chance to comment on the proceedings. So I'll start first on environmental justice. In C1, which is the Rio Grande LNG facility in Rio Bravo, there are 367 newly identified communities environmental justice communities that may be impacted by the Commission's decision. Those communities have had no meaningful opportunity to comment on the potential impacts the project may have or on the mitigation to address those potential impacts. By failing to issue a supplemental EIS and instead tucking this revised safety and environmental analysis into today's order, the Commission has created an incomplete and inadequate record and lacks a basis for reasoned decision-making. I disagree. I believe that these orders are deficient under the Natural Gas Act, under NEPA, and under the APA, and that fact alone invites further delay. More generally, this procedural corner cutting represents a gobsmacking departure, frankly, from the lessons I took away from the Environmental Justice Roundtable we held just a month ago. I also want to touch on the significance issue, and that's relevant in orders C1 and C2, as well as a partial dissent of mine in C4. The majority order on the significance of greenhouse gas emissions should be considered in the context of the ongoing dialogue that this Commission has been having for the last year in our open greenhouse gas docket and our natural gas policy statement document. Until today, during this period, the orders we've issued have justified the lack of a significance finding for GHG emissions, based in large part because the issue is under consideration in this open docket. I have been clear in my own lessons learned department that I am open to working with my colleagues towards incremental improvements to the 1999 policy statement and our environmental considerations via the record in that docket. Today, unfortunately, the majority order flouts that process and all of the comments in that docket pertaining to GHG significance findings. Instead, it moves to solidify, in this individual, fact-specific proceeding, the idea that it is simply impossible to use social cost of carbon at the project level and that no other credible method is available. So here's the thing. I don't know if social cost of carbon will ultimately work for project level analyses review for the Commission's review or not. But the Commission hasn't tried to seriously evaluate the question. Today's order provides a hit parade of previously expressed concerns about social cost of carbon, but nowhere engages with counter perspectives in the open docket or explain why it need not do so. This doesn't further the goals of regulatory certainty, and it certainly doesn't engage with and value the comments that we asked for in the docket related to our significance findings. And so for those reasons, while I hope that we will continue to find a path forward on these issues collaboratively at the Commission, I'm going to dissent in C1, C2, and partially in C4. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Christie.
I have no opening statement. I have no separate statements on any items today, dissents or concurrences, and I'll be voting yes on every item. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioners. We are now ready to move to the consent agenda.
Thank you. Since the issuance of the Sunshine Act notice on April 13, 2023, C5 and C6 have been stricken from this morning's agenda. Your consent agenda for this morning is as follows. Electric, E1, E2, E3, E5, E6, E7, E8, E9, E10, E11, E12, E13, E14, E15, E16, E17, and E18. Hydro items H1 and H2. Certificates items C1, C2, C3, and C4. As to E1, Commissioner Danley is dissenting with a separate statement. As to E3, Commissioner Danley is concurring in part and is dissenting in part with a separate statement. As to C1, Chairman Phillips is concurring with a separate statement, and Commissioner Clements is dissenting with a separate statement. As to C2, Chairman Phillips is concurring with a separate statement, and Commissioner Clements is dissenting with a separate statement. As to C3, Commissioner Danley is concurring with a separate statement. And as to C4, Commissioner Clements is dissenting in part with a separate statement. We will now turn to the vote on this morning's consent agenda items. The vote begins with Commissioner Christie.
I vote yes on all items. I have no reading material to offer anyone. I have no separate statements.
Commissioner Clements.
Noting my dissents in C1 and C2 and my dissent in part in C4, I vote aye.
Commissioner Danley.
Noting my dissent in E1, my concurrence in part and dissent in part in E3, and my concurrence in C3, I vote aye.
And Chairman Phillips.
Noting my concurrence in C1 and C2, I vote aye.
Thank you.
I will now turn to my colleagues for any closing statements they might have. Commissioner Danley.
Nothing from me except to tell everybody that they should read my dissent in E1.
Commissioner Clements.
Well, you might as well add my dissents in C1, C2 to that reading list.
Commissioner Christie.
I got nothing for you to read.
I want to thank you all. Thank you for your patience. They often say that they may not remember what you say when you do something, but they'll remember how you made people feel. I want you to know that I respect your time. This is not a practice that I want to make permanent starting late. So I give you my commitment to do everything that we can, that when we can, we'll give you notice that we will have to start late. And my apologies again for today. That concludes. We're adjourned.